Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the Wallace and Gromit movies. So recently I went back and watched every Wallace and Gromit movie in a big Wallace and Gromit marathon. As a kid growing up, I watched the first three shorts as well as the Curse of the Were-Rabbit feature film. I believe I saw it when it came out, actually. The idea of watching them all came up with some friends when we were posting a few Wallace and Gromit memes to one another, and we figured we may as well just go through and watch them all now with the release of the newest one on Netflix. So yeah, today I'm just going to be talking about each one of them as we go, as well as ranking them in an overall position of which ones I enjoy the most and which I enjoy the least. Before we get into it, just a few initial impressions after seeing them all. I never really realized how horrible Wallace is to Gromit. I think it's definitely more subtle at the start, but as they go on, it gets played up further and further, where he's not outright like horrible to him, but he kind of just he takes Gromit very much for granted, where Gromit is pretty much doing all the work in every single movie, and Wallace is just this oblivious idiot who, doesn't really thank Gromit for everything that he does. And the other thing I noticed as well is that over time, the films shift to their humor being more based on wordplay jokes rather than physical humor. I noticed at the start, it's almost like a silent film. There's very little dialogue. But as the series progresses, it starts to be more about wordplay jokes and puns and all that sort of stuff. So with all that being said, let's just get right into the first movie, Grand Day Out, 1989. Due to its smaller scope, because obviously this was the first one they made, so it's the simplest, let's say. It felt like the most cozy and sincere to me because it's almost very homegrown and home baked. All the gags in the movie are very quaint and not necessarily sweet, but really just very kind of oddball things, just small details here and there that ended up getting some of the biggest laughs out of me out of the entire series. I also remember the villain or the antagonist, let's say, being a lot more evil, but it's kind of sweet that he isn't actually evil or a villain, and he gets his own little happy ending too as well. I kind of like that. That I don't think the rest of the movies do that. The villains are villains, but it's kind of nice that in the first one everyone gets their own little ending, which I thought was sweet for a little children's animation. For me at least, this ended up being the one that I enjoyed most, maybe just because it was so small and humble. I feel like it really just hit the mark on everything it wanted to do. So yeah, for me, at least this is my favorite Wallace and Gromit. Moving on to The Wrong Trousers, 1993. This one is probably the one that everyone knows the most, featuring our iconic villain, the penguin, little penguin with the rubber glove head. Not only the character design, but as well as the cinematography and sound design, especially, really make this villain that's the reason why everyone knows this one is because of that penguin.
I'm asking 20 a week. That will include your breakfast. I suppose you like kippers, do you? Partial to a nice black pudding yourself.
And I really think the sound design really just plays up how evil and truly manipulative and masterminding that the penguin is. I think it's just really great that they're able to, with a silent character, have him be so clearly antagonistic and evil. I will admit that I was starting to lose interest a little bit when I was watching the movie, but then the chase scene started with the little mini train set, and that for me instantly reminded me of like, oh, okay, this is why everyone loves this movie as well, because that entire sequence from start to finish is just so good. It's by far like the highlight of the movie and one of the highlights of like the entire series. It's it's very funny, and at the same time it's also very engaging. Like you're on the edge of your seat and like laughing out loud as you go. Like just the pacing with it is really great. They definitely know how to do chase scenes in Wallace and Gromit, and this like is the prime example of that. This was my second favorite Wallace and Gromit overall. There's some really high highs like with the villain and the chase scene at the end, but I think just towards like the start, like the bank heist scene wasn't as like gripping for me as I remember it being as a kid. It felt like a little bit flat. So I think that's what held it back from being number one. But yeah, still like my second favorite Wallace and Gromit movie. This one is like obviously quintessential Wallace and Gromit. Moving on to A Close Shave, 1995, their third short. This one definitely felt like a step down for me, whereas the first two were very close. Like it's kind of tough for me to choose between like which one I preferred most. But yeah, this one I feel like definitely I didn't enjoy as much as the first two. Gwendoline's compliance with the villain dog Preston doesn't feel sufficiently explained. She's kind of just going with him for like plot convenience, which is fine, but that it just kind of held it back for me because I was like, why exactly is she just working with him, you know? And then suddenly it's like, oh, yeah, I don't want to work with you now because you're evil. It was like, it kind of held back the plot for me a little bit. There's still some great visual gags as well, and another fantastic chase scene, like not on par with The Wrong Trousers, but still like a really great chase scene. Like they definitely know how to do chase scenes in the Wallace and Gromit series. Overall, I just didn't really find it like as funny or as humorous as the first two. So this is still my third favorite out of all of the Wallace and Gromit movies, but I think it was just a bit of a step down from the first two. Continuing on to the feature-length film Wallace and Gromit: Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Came out in 2005. I believe this is a collaboration with DreamWorks. Yes, DreamWorks. Such a massive step up in terms of the scale of the animation and like the size of the sets and everything. Not to mention it being feature length as well. Like I'm gonna have to go back and look at some behind the scenes on how they did this because it is just so ridiculously grandiose and amazing. Like I'm almost like distracted at times from like when they're trying to like have like story beats or gags because I'm like the animation is just like how did they do this like without it taking a bajillion years, you know? It's an amazing movie to look at. I will say though the feature length size of it I feel like acts like a deterrent almost to the spirit of what Wallace and Gromit has been so far. There's a lot more pressure to have a more complicated story to pad out that runtime of 90 minutes compared to if it was just a 30-minute short. So it means like there's a lot more dialogue that they get bogged down in. And with this one as well, you definitely start to see a lot more of those wordplay jokes, which I personally don't really care for. I much prefer like the physical humor and just like making gags like with the animation. Like I would be happy if these were like silent films, you know. I feel like the strength or where I consistently like laugh the most is with their physical humor and their like gags like that. So not really a big fan of them having like these more like pun like wordplay type jokes. So it brought it down for me a little bit in the end. This was my second least favorite out of all of them. Not too much for me in terms of like the humor or the story, but in terms of the animation, like this is phenomenal. I would say maybe the most impressive out of all of them. Like again, it's kind of just I was getting distracted by how good it looked, and I was just like constantly thinking in my head of like, okay, how did they do this? How did they do that? Like, you know, there's so much going on and so many amazing things. Um, it's absolutely still worth watching. I'd say these are all obviously worth watching, but yeah, I think for me it was just the animation was phenomenal, just brought down by the story and the gags. Moving on to A Matter of Loaf and Death, 2008. So this one, as well as Vengeance Most Foul, I had not seen before. So this was actually my first time seeing it. I was not even aware it existed, to be honest, until about a few weeks ago when I watched all of these. So what I liked about this one is it's nice that Gromit gets to interact with a non-villain character for once. He is always getting the short end of the stick and having to pretty much be the one to deal with the villain at the end of the day. So it's nice that he finally has like not even just like love interest aside, just like a character that's not a villain that we see like some interaction with, you know, just to give him some more like characterization and screen time as well. It was really nice. So I liked seeing that for the first time. This one, I feel like it fell in between the cracks where there's not as much physical gags as there would be with a short, but there's also no grand scale like the Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Like the animation is amazing, but still just on a smaller scale than what Curse of the Were-Rabbit was. So it kind of falls a little bit flat in both areas for me, where I'm like, well, it's not like super funny, and then also like it's not like the peak of the Wallace and Gromit animation. So I think just due to it falling like short in both areas, this ended up being my least favorite actually. I feel like Wallace's inventions as well, that's kind of a key part of this entire series, is that he's an inventor, and you know, his inventions come into play in the story or the plot in each of these movies. It doesn't really have a role to play in this story at all compared to like the previous movies. You know, it doesn't even really matter that he's an inventor at all. So I feel like that's kind of missing the formula of the Wallace and Gromit movies. You know, is that like Wallace is an inventor. He always has like a wacky new invention that inevitably becomes part of the story. Like, you know, wrong trousers, it's the pair of trousers. In Curse of the Were-Rabbit, you know, he's the one who's capturing all the rabbits with his inventions. But in this one, it really doesn't do anything in the story. So I think that was a missed opportunity as well. So yeah, ultimately, this one was my least favorite out of all of them. But still worth watching, definitely. But yeah, just like, I think every other Wallace and Gromit movie does some aspect better than this one did. So yeah. And finally, moving on to the most recent one, which sparked this whole video to begin with, Vengeance Most Foul 2024. It's certainly not as funny as the first three, but narrative-wise, I would say this one is actually my favorite out of all of the Wallace and Gromit movies. It's very satisfying, I will say, to have the character development from Wallace to actually be more grateful for Gromit and everything that he does. It feels like we've been waiting like 35-ish or so years for this moment, you know? So that's why I would be very happy if this was the last one they ever made. I feel like this is a nice ending point for it, just due to having that kind of closure, I want to say, even that, you know, finally Wallace has like actually like appreciated Gromit a little bit for what he's done. And don't get me wrong, that chemistry between them is definitely intentional. That leads to like all these comedic moments. But I think just having gone through all these, especially in one sitting, you really realize like that how little Wallace like respects Gromit, and like there's so much that he takes for granted. So it was very, very nice to like have Wallace finally appreciate Gromit, you know. That was a very nice closure moment. So in the end, this was my fourth favorite out of all of the Wallace and Gromit movies. Not really like super funny, but more so just like for the story, for me at least. I really, really enjoyed it. And being feature length as well, it has like a very large scale as well. I would still say a little bit smaller scale than Curse of the Were-Rabbit, in my opinion, but it's not like super big. It's still, all of these movies are absolutely amazing and like a treat to look at visually. So yeah, fourth favorite, Vengeance Most Foul. Some closing thoughts that I had now that we've wrapped up my thoughts on each of the movies. For me, the series shines most when it has these Mr. Bean-esque jokes that surpass the language barrier and take advantage of the medium of animation to have these extreme, like, wacky circumstances and situations, as well as even just smaller moments that do make you laugh just from, like, their absurdity and simplicity and, like, mundanity. Regardless of the quality of the writing as well with each of these movies, it is always just a pleasure to enjoy the animation and the sheer time that it takes to go into making these films. If you watch any of the behind the scenes of these movies, which I recommend you do, you'll realize that animating with stop motion is a extremely time consuming process, to say the least. So it's very amazing that after all these decades, there's still a series like this that's able to create these just really nice, amazing animations that look beautiful. But that's everything I had to say about the Wallace and Gromit series. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment below on what your favourite or your least favourite Wallace and Gromit movie is and why. I would love to know your thoughts, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe The Wrong Trousers is the best Wallace and Gromit movie of all time. I disagree, but let me know your thoughts anyway. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.
Everywhere, pre-rolls in my milk, hey.